Hello fellow do-it-yourselfers. This video is about a 2002 Nissan Frontier with trouble codes P0132 and P1163. So a friend of mine gave me a call and told me his check engine light was on. So I asked him, what did he notice anything different about his car? And these are the questions I usually ask. And he said, no, the truck is driving great, no issues, still accelerated strong, idled well, and all that. So when I was able to get access to the truck, I pulled the check engine codes, and these are the two that I received. I find it interesting that it's both front upstream O2 sensors. I also pulled the freeze frame data. Not sure which this is for the P1163 code. Each PCM has rules about which freeze frame data it would keep. There's certain codes of higher priority that even if there's a trouble code already in there with a freeze frame, it would overwrite it. I looked that up in the manual. Each car is slightly different in how they handle multiple trouble codes. Anyway, so this is the P1163, so I have no way of knowing if this was the first or second trouble code. That's what I'm trying to get at. Anyway, I looked at this, and the code was the car was under a good amount of load, 74%. We have a lot of hills around here, and I think he told me he was coming up the hill when this happened. His engine speed was 2600. Throttle position was not too much really. Temperature was 96, so it wasn't quite. Intake air temperature, so it was a warm day. The coolant was 186, so the car was warm. And if you're alarmed at the fuel trim percentage, via some self-research, I looked online, looked in the manuals I had. They didn't indicate how they display their fuel trims. But I'm pretty confident on this car with my scan tool, 100%, 100 there would indicate 0 fuel trim being modified. So that means 108, 8% is being added, whereas like the 98% is 2% is being removed. So in essence, that's a total fuel trim of 6%. Likewise over here, that's a total of 8% because they're both over 100. Took me a while to figure that out, and I wish the manual would indicate how to read their fuel trim values. So P0132 is a generic code. I can tell because after the P is a 0, and this case it's a manufacturer specific. I wanted to highlight this because I'm not sure how a generic scan tool would display the second code. The first one, it would definitely have it in its database and maybe give you some tests. I'm not sure how it would handle the P1163 since that's manufacturer specific. I'm sure it would list it out, but you might have to do research on your own. What was good is I have looked at this truck before, about 4 months ago, and I did observe that the upstream O2 sensors were lazy. They were responding slowly. The sine waves, how it oscillates, were spread out, and they didn't really peak as much as I would expect. Fortunately, I told that to him. That's probably why he called me when this happened. But I was concerned that both upstream O2 sensors had an issue at the same time. So I was trying to figure out what in common could cause both those two sensors to fail at the same time or indicate an issue. And what came to mind would maybe be the heater circuit. So let's say that fuse blew for some reason, engine got wet or whatever, and it blew that. The heater circuit wouldn't warm up the O2s quick enough, and the PCM may flag them as an issue. So given that, I wanted to determine how the heater circuits worked, and I knew that was probably my first test I was going to have to do. So I used the Scan Tools troubleshooter feature to see what it would tell me, and it told me something interesting. When the engine is at idle, it's an open loop, so it wanted me to rev it to 2 grand. That would increase the gas flow, exhaust flow past the O2 sensors, warming them up, and then they would be able to register a good value. And they suggested 0.2 to 0.8. And it should be cycling between lean and rich. I then also researched what the codes and everything using Mitchell Do-It-Yourself Online, and what I deemed or gained from that is the wiring diagrams and the expected voltages as well. I then researched the P1163 via the scan tool, and it was roughly the same, because they're both very similar, these two errors. So rev it 2 grand, it should cycle 5 times in 10 seconds, and it should be peaking 0.2 to 0.8. Mitchell Do-It-Yourself Online had the same sort of stuff. It said the sensor was lazy. It gave me wiring diagrams, which we'll discuss later. Expected voltages were 0.2, 0.8. But on this one, it suggested I verify some grounds as well. But I'm not familiar with Nissan, so I didn't know which is bank 1. So this diagram to the right is from Mitchell Do-It-Yourself Online, giving them credit for their work. And bank 1 is on the passenger side front. So if you're looking at the car, so I'm standing in front of the truck, you know, in front of the radiator, bank 1 is on the left, and bank 2 would be to the right. So what I wanted to do is physically inspect the sensors first, because maybe they melted, maybe one of the lines was against the EGR, which would maybe cause it to short, you know, who knows. So I started with the physical, and in this truck it was very easy. It's pretty open engine bay. This is the passenger side O2 sensor. Looks okay to me. I then went to the driver's side. This one's a little harder to get to. You have some of the you'll see some of the AC lines, evap lines, dipstick, intake. I believe this is part of the intake over here. But anyway, I still could get to it, and it looked fine. It's even clean and shiny, and the wires were great. But this wire did wrap around the rear of the engine all the way to the other side, but it did appear okay. I wanted to see if I could reproduce the issue, so I hooked up my scan tool, and here's what I found. If you look at sensor 1 bank 2, he's flatlined. And if you look at sensor 1 bank 1, he's not. Those aren't nice sort of oscillating curves. You see how this is curved at the bottom, but the top's real sharp. It gets up there and immediately drops. So it's sort of lazy at the top, right? It's not granular enough to allow you to see these to allow a curve to happen at the top. So these aren't real healthy O2 sensors. And don't be fooled by these two downstream ones. If you look at the scale, it's the problem with this scan tool is the scale. You got to look at the scale when you're looking at a graph, or you'll get fooled. These are actually on the lean side, which is good. Again, those are the downstream ones at the top. Upstreams are on the bottom. So like I was saying, you can clearly see the sensor 1 bank 2 would definitely have an issue of not being min-max, right? It's flatlined, so that's easy to see. And on the right, unfortunately, I wasn't able to reproduce it because it was oscillating. But if you look, it's not peaking very well. It's definitely getting to 0.2, but it isn't hitting hard 0.8 too much, right? If 0.82 is at the top, it's not really reaching that very well. So it is definitely having range overall errors, even though that's not what the error is, but you can definitely see it. So this is from Mitchell Do-It-Yourself Online, and if you look at what they're saying that curve should look like, notice it's curved at the top and curved at the bottom. They said something interesting, that they expect it to be 0.3 and 0.6. That should be the minimum. If that's the case, then those sensors look pretty good, huh? From my experience, you want 0.2 to 0.8, but this is what they said. So what I tried to do is see if I could even get them to warm up at all, so I could run some other tests. So I just revved the motor for a while, and if you notice, they did start responding. They did start oscillating, but again, they're not nice curves. If you look at sensor 1, he's pretty lazy. He's not doing too well. Bank 1 is doing a little better, but at the top you can see it's not detecting rich very well. So my overall goal is I wanted to test signal integrity first, and then heater circuit functionality of each sensor. So to test signal integrity, I needed to test each O2 sensor to make sure it could go lean, signal the PCM a lean condition, and a rich condition. So for the lean test, for both of these tests, I decided to use the brake booster line because it was easy to get to, and it's a large hose allowing me to get into the intake. So that's the brake booster right back here, and this line, this big hose right here, goes into the intake, as you can see right here. So I disconnected it. You can tell this is where it used to be, and it's disconnected, so you would expect a what condition? You'd expect a lean condition. So what I did, this is before I disconnected. You notice it's actually looking better. The tops are rounder. They're peaking a little better. And then I disconnected it, and it went lean toward the bottom. These are O2 sensors, so it's toward the bottom. Air fuel would be the opposite, but this is an O2 sensor, so the signal should go down. So that looked good. So now I want to do a rich test, and I'm going to use use propane. And I'm going to use that same hose, and I'm going to apply propane right to it. And no, the propane bottle is not lit. There's no flame there. No, it's just I open up the little valve here, and it's allowing a good stream of propane to come out this tip and into the intake. And this is what it was. Remember, I was just doing a lean test, and after applying and turning on the propane, they went rich. But what do you notice about sensor 1? Why is he tapering down, but yet I'm sorry, bank 2 is tapering down, whereas bank 1 is staying, well, fairly stable, right? So these O2 sensors are not doing too well. So they both passed, right? Signal integrity passed. The scan tool, which is connected to the PCM, is able to get signals, full range of signal from the O2 sensors, right? We're able to detect lean, or to be able to transmit lean to the PCM, and the PCM is able to receive it, and rich. So now I know signal integrity is good. So now signal integrity test passed. Now I want to go to heater circuit functionality. I need to test both upstream O2 sensors, the ones having issues, to make sure they have good heater functionality. So to understand the heater circuit, I wanted to look at Mitchell do-it-yourself online manual to see what's going on. So here's the wiring diagram. So in the middle here is the oxygen sensor, and it's a 3-wire oxygen sensor. And again, this diagram is from Mitchell Do-It-Yourself Online. I want to give them credit for this. This is their diagram. What's interesting is looking at this diagram, it tells you everything you need to know. So this one right here is ground, because up here I know that's power, and I know this one is signal. Let's go through that. So this one I know is signal because it has this sort of shielding around it, because the O2 sensor creates such a low AC frequency that outside noise could affect it. So they put this shielding around it, and then it goes right to ground. That's how you can tell on diagrams. Many sensors, like I believe a NOx sensor tends to have it, and maybe even some speed sensors, because they're generating a low current AC value to the PCM, and outside AC can affect that. So they tend to shield that. So looking at this diagram, I knew immediately the signaling line was that one because it's shielded. And this one's easy to tell that's the power because it's connected to a 15 amp fuse. So again, looking at this diagram, I know there's a fuse. This is power, blue, white. This is ground, has to be ground. And then this is the signaling. So, but I wanted to be thorough. I have had some cases where the diagram did not match the actual engine, so I went and I checked each one. And lo and behold, it did. So these are the both banks of sensors. So this bottom side here, again, we're on the passenger side of the engine, on the valve cover. These two O2 sensors are the front and rear for bank 1, the passenger side, and these over here are the O2 sensors for the driver side, bank 2, front and rear. So we looked at the wires, and there's 3 of them, and there's 2 whites and a black. Remember, this is this going to the sensor. The colors from the wiring diagram would have been back in here. And there is the passenger side, bank 1. Notice there's 3 wires. So they match. I was happy. So now I can progress. So I hooked up my scope meter's low amp clamp to the upstream heater wires, which is the white wires. Right here I'm doing the bank 1, sensor 1. And it gave me 1 amp. So now I know current flow is occurring. You cannot have amperage if there's no current flow. So if there was an open, there would not be any amperage, right? Because you need a complete circuit for amperage to occur. So I know the PCM is in control, and the wire integrity is good for this sensor because current is flowing. So sensor 1, bank 1 passed. Let's do the next one. So now I hook it up to the other side, the bank 2 heater wire, and again I'm getting 1 amp. So again, to repeat, if I was not getting any amperage, that could be a variety of reasons. It could be the PCM's not in control, an open, a short in the sensor, or whatever. But this is showing the circuit is working because 1 amp of current is going through. What was unfortunate is I scoured through the manual looking for what this spec should be. Spent probably half an hour and couldn't find it. But from experience, 1 amp is a normal value. It's within acceptable range. So sensor 1, bank 2 passed. So that implied that, again, or summary, signal integrity was good and heater circuit functionality passed. So at this point I knew the following, right? All my data gathering. Let's have a summary. I remember a while back I noticed the sensors were slow in response. The sensors are definitely even slower this time around, right? If you remember some of those graphs. Sensors would start to behave okay if they were warmed up for a good amount of time. I do know the sensors can communicate with the ECM, and the heater circuits for the sensors work. So I wanted to just go one step further, and I wanted to see if there's any TSBs about these issues, and there were not. So again, I re-reviewed the diagnostic procedures for both codes, and if you remember one of them said check grounds. I didn't want to do that until I verified it. I didn't want to change a lot of things in the environment before I ran my test, right? Because let's pretend this ground was bad, and I just immediately jumped to it and did this procedure, and all of a sudden it worked. I wouldn't know for sure if the ground fix fixed it, or it just started working on its own. So I try not to change the environment as much as I can. I want to reproduce the issue, do a fix, and verify if that fix fixed it. Gives me a higher correlation of that my fix actually fixed it. So that's why I waited on that until now. And in their procedures, there's these two wires. This is the intake. I believe that's a fuel rail, I believe. I can't recall. But anyway, right here are two screws that they say you should check out and verify corrosion or whatever, they're loose, has not occurred. Well, I took them off. I looked at them. They were beautiful. I reinstalled. I cleaned them up with a wire brush nonetheless and applied dielectric grease. So at this point, I knew that the O2 sensors needed to be replaced. So I just thought I'd share some of the highlights of the replacement of the O2 sensors. What was important is you use the appropriate O2 sensor sockets. And here are my sensor kit. If you notice, these particular sockets are different than normal sockets in that they have a slit here. What that slit is allows the wire on the back of the sensor to slide up in here, and then you can get the body over it. That way you don't ruin the wiring or bend them or cause them damage them. So I used both of these, and one time I needed a straight up one, another one I needed an offset one that's lower profile. So I used both of these in this job. So I removed both O2 sensors. I chased the threads, and then on this car, on the passenger side, it had an additional bung. So the exhaust manifold had like a bigger threaded screw or a thread in it, and then it had this bung in there with it, which was also threaded to allow the O2 sensor to be installed. This is the bung, and as you can tell, this is extremely rusty. It's hard to show in this picture, but you notice this edge is really broken down. So this had to be replaced. First off, it's deteriorating, so the threads may not hold, which would allow oxygen to enter the intake, which could, exhaust manifold, which could cause faulty readings, and it may not hold, and it's just going to break down. So we wanted to change out this bung as well. So once we got a new bung, we installed it and torqued it down per spec. We used the appropriate anti-seize on the bung as well, and on the O2 sensors, making sure not to get anti-seize close to the tip. You don't want that little, it can affect the O2 sensor, so you don't want to go crazy with that anti-seize. Just follow the procedure, and you just put a dab on there, and it'll do all the threads. And then I connected both O2 sensors. If you notice, I didn't say I put dielectric in the O2 connector. Some O2s, surprisingly, actually wick down. They pull oxygen down into it via the wires. So you don't always want to put dielectric. Look in your manual. This manual didn't say it, so I erred on not putting dielectric grease on the connectors. So once they were installed, the procedure said you needed to clear the self-learning data related to the O2 sensors, so I did that. My friend was jazzed that we got it running actually fairly quick. All this procedure, the diagnostic procedure, took probably about 10 minutes, even though it took me much longer to describe it. The researching took I'd say about 45 minutes, because trying to find that heater spec took me quite a while, and I never did find it. Heater current, remember that heater current amp spec? Couldn't find it. So we drove around, and lo and behold, if you notice, the O2 sensors did complete. So in our run, so we drove freeway, we did some city, and we just drove around and talked. I'd say, I don't know how long it took. But on that drive, everything passed. My friend has been driving this truck for now about 6 months, and no issues, no check engine light, car's driving great, so we'll consider it's a fix. Thank you for watching. I hope you found the information helpful.